Hey everyone, so today we're going to be looking at a Maguu Genki, Diluc, and Jean deck. Maguu Genki and Jean are no strangers to today's metagame because Maguu Genki has been pivotal in many different superconduct decks, whereas Jean is an all-round great control character whereby she forces your opponents to swap their characters and therefore disrupting its strategy. On top of that, she is a pretty good healer as well, but I do think that Diluc has been a little bit underrated and overlooked as a character in TCG. Reason for that is because he's able to do huge damage, he's able to apply pyro, and therefore he is able to access elemental reactions such as melt to get an additional +2 damage bonus. With the use of melt damage, his burst will be upgraded to a 10 damage attack, which should be able to knock out most characters in one turn. I do think that this particular deck is pretty well positioned in today's metagame because in today's meta, you see two types of decks. You either see lots of setup OTK decks like Yoimiya, Quick and Cyno, whereby they need time to set up, but the moment they set up, you're dead. On the other hand, you also see lots of different decks that deal with heavy recovery such as normal OTK decks or the different Barbara Xingqiu decks that allow you to access hydro healing. And Barbara, she may look like a very friendly character, but she's actually really scary because through the use of her skill, you're able to heal 1 damage every single turn, and through the use of a burst, the entire team heals 4 damage, which is actually really sad if you spend lots of resources and time and traded your own health in order to do damage on your opponent's characters. So with the rise of setup OTK decks and the rise of healing decks, I think what we need to do today is to set up a team that's able to defeat one of your opponent's characters in one fell swoop as quickly as possible, or at least try to control their setup characters. And that's basically where Maguu Genki and Jean come in. Maguu Genki fulfills the first criteria as a setup character. Reason for that is because of his elemental skills. Through his elemental skills, essentially he can either deal 1 anemo damage or he can deal 1 Cryo damage. The catch here is that he'll be able to summon 1 ally that is able to deal continuous anemo or Cryo damage at the end of the turn. For example, if you use Frosty Assault, you'll deal 1 Cryo damage right now to your opponent's active character, and then you summon a Shadow Sword Galloping Frost. Essentially what it does is that during the end phase, this little guy here will be dealing 1 Cryo damage at your opponent's active characters, and this has a total of 2 usages, which means that it will last for 2 rounds. What this means is that what you can do with Maguu Genki is to set up huge melt turns for Diluc, because essentially when your opponent sends out their active character, you will want to use Frosty Assault, you want to apply Cryo to them, and then after that you can use your Bustering Blade to deal anemo damage to your opponent's active character, and that way you'll be able to activate Swirl for additional damage onto your opponent's active character, but you'll also be able to spread the Cryo application to the rest of the team. And this is pretty good because it means that you will be able to consistently apply Cryo damage to your opponent's standby characters, and therefore being able to swap into Diluc for very big melt damage and hopefully a quick knockout. The second thing here is that because you're able to apply Swirl consistently, basically you'll be able to use Maguu Genki as a character that can chip down your opponent's damage even if they are not on the field through the use of Swirl damage. So the piercing damage and the Cryo application threat that Maguu Genki applies on your opponent's team is very strong, and therefore I like him as a setup character. What I also like about him is that his elemental burst is pretty strong as well. Essentially, you will be able to deal 4 anemo damage to your opponent's character, assuming your opponent already has Cryo in place, right? It means that this will deal a total of 5 damage and swirl the rest of your opponent's team as well. On top of the 5 damage, it will also trigger the effects of all of your different Shadow Sword summons, which means that you can swirl the Cryo for a total of 5 damage, and then you'll be able to use Frosty Assault and Bustering Blade for an additional 2 damage, which means that your opponent should die. even if they are on a total of 7 damage. And as mentioned earlier in this video, in this current meta, knocking out your opponent swiftly before they set up their big damage turns or they set up their recovery turns is super important. And therefore, don't sleep on this elemental burst. But that said, Maguu Kenki is not the only support that we have here in this deck. Jean is a really good support as well. We all know Galeblade, we either love it or hate it. Essentially what it does is that it deals 3 anemo damage, and then the target is forcibly switched to the next character on the right. Essentially what this means is that you can either use Maguu Genki, right, to apply Cryo, and then after that you can swap into Jean through the use of your various fast action cards that I'll be going through later. Use her Galeblade so that you can do 2 things. You can spread the Cryo damage and swirl it through the rest of the team, and then you can also swap your opponent's character to the next character. It really depends on the scenario on which character you should be starting with. Should you start with Maguu Genki? Should you start with Jean? Or maybe even Diluc? I think it really depends on the situation. If my opponent is a healing team, what I would do is that I will probably send out Maguu Genki first to get all the chip damage in, set up the burst, and try to kill their healer. If they are a setup team like Keqing, if they have Fischl and Cole specifically, what I would do is that I will more often than not, probably swap into Jean as well, Jean instead, so that I can use Galeblade so that they do not set up the Cole at all. So Cole is probably the biggest threat in the Keqing team because she is the only character that is able to aggravate and activate Keqing and buff your opponent's electric and electro damage. So it really depends on the situation on which character you want to send out first. It also depends on whether you're going first or second. Hopefully the gameplay videos I show you later can give you a bit of insight as to why I decided to go with Maguu Genki first and why I decided to go with Jean first. But essentially, yeah, that is basically both of your setup characters. Now that we've gone through Maguu Genki and Jean and what they do as a character, let's look at Diluc. For Diluc, he is pretty straightforward. He is a beater. With his normal attack, you do your usual physical damage for 2 damage. With his elemental skill, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. He's able to do 3 pyro damage, and if you use this skill the 3rd time each round, it deals an additional 2 damage. So this can be pretty big because imagine you have a situation whereby Cyro is applied to your opponent's entire team. And if you're in the mid to late game, they should only have about 5 to 7 HP left. Essentially what this means for Searing Onslaught is that somehow if you have 9 Pyro dice, and I'll show you how we can do that later, somehow if we have 9 Pyro dice or 9 Omni dice, essentially you can do 5 damage to the first character, including melt bonus, 5 damage to them, hopefully knock them out, deal 5 damage to the next one, and then finally you can deal a total of 7 damage to the final character there. So this is one of the win conditions. It's not super consistent, so I wouldn't rely on it, but it is there if you happen to be able to activate the final boost, right? The key thing about Diluc that I really like though is actually his elemental burst. It is a bit more expensive. It does cost 4 dice and 3 energy, but essentially it deals 8 pyro damage through the use of Melt boost. Essentially this deals a total of 10 damage, which should be able to knock out most characters in today's meta in one hit, especially in the mid to late game. By the time you have Diluc set up, you have all of this 3 energy set up, your opponent should not have any characters at 10 HP. If you do, you may be in trouble. I mean, you may not be in trouble if your opponent has 10 HP. You will be in trouble if your opponent has 10 HP and some shields online. But yeah, I do think that Elemental Burst is basically a guaranteed knockout for most of your opponent's characters. On top of that, your Diluc will also gain Pyro Infusion for 2 rounds. And this is pretty good because essentially, if you still have Maguu Genki's Shadow Guys online, you'll be able to use Maguu Genki's Shadow Guys to consistently apply Cryo damage to the rest of the team, and Diluc will be able to deal 4 Cryo-Melt damage through the use of his Tempered Sword, instead of just 2 measly damage, 2 measly physical damage. So that is Diluc as a character. So in summary, what you're really trying to do with these 3 characters is that with Maguu Genki, you want to apply Cryo damage to your opponent's team, try to sword it as much as possible, and set up your burst as quickly as possible so that you can take a 7 HP knockout. With Jean, sometimes you might want to swap to her because you want to control the kind of tempo your opponent have. You might want to control the type of characters that they are able to set up. For example, Yoimiya and Kole, you may want to use Jean to swap them out to another character as soon as possible, because the moment these 2 characters, Yoimiya, Xingqiu, and even Kole, are set up, once these 3 characters are set up, you are in big trouble. And then finally, Diluc is just chilling in the back, waiting for Maguu Genki and Jean to do the hard work of chipping down damage, and then come out of nowhere to deal huge melt damage. And that, in summary, is what these 3 characters do. So now that we've looked at what the characters are, we do have a few different packages here in this particular deck, and I will be going through the deck choices and why we decided to play certain cards here. So let's look at equipment first. It might be a little bit thematic for us to have Wolf's Gravestone, as that is probably Diluc's signature weapon in the actual game as well. But I do think that Wolf's Gravestone is a great card in general for Claymore characters, because even if you do not have the melt damage bonus, if Jean and Maguu Genki are able to chip your opponent's characters down to 6 HP, Wolf's Gravestone essentially allows you to deal an additional 3 damage, which means that your normal attack is now a 5 damage attack, and your elemental skill is now a 6 damage attack. So what this means is that the moment your opponents go down to 6 damage, or rather 6 HP for their characters, they are in the Diluc kill zone through the use of Wolf's Gravestone, and they will be in trouble. The second thing that we have here is Gambler's Earrings. We like to have Gambler's Earrings on Diluc because essentially once you knock out a opposing character, you'll be able to get 2 Omni Elemental dice. This is really good for Diluc because it's one of the things that enables his Searing Onslaught, right? As we mentioned earlier, in order for Searing Onslaught's bonus to work, you need at least 9 Pyro dice or 9 Omni dice. And you know what? Most of the time you only set out 8. So through the use of Gambler's Glove, if you can knock out a opponent's character, essentially you end up with a total of 10 dice for the turn, and therefore you'll be able to use Searing Onslaught, which is really good for Diluc. So those are the only 2 equipment I run. If you think I should be running anything else, do let me know. I have been thinking about the Anemo artifacts, but I didn't commit to it. But yeah, let me know if there's any other equipment you would run. In terms of dice fixing, right? Let's look at some of the different cards that we have. Dice fixing is super important, especially for Maguu Genki and Diluc. Reason why I say that is because Maguu Genki is primarily an Anemo character, but in order for you to use Frosty Assault, you need to have 3 Cryo dice. And there have been so many games whereby I whiffed on my Cryo dice because I didn't play enough dice fixes, or I didn't re-roll my dice correctly. So because Maguu Genki really needs to apply Cryo damage in order to activate Diluc's Melt bonus damage, what you need to play is the dice fixing package, which is Knights of Fulfillment's Library. Some people may say, oh, why don't you play Jade Chamber, or why don't you play something else? I like Knight of Fulfillment's Library in this particular deck because with Jade Chamber, if you have Maguu Genki as your active character, Jade Chamber guarantees you 2 Anemo dice. But what if I actually want a Cryo dice instead? I really have to try my luck and roll for it. And therefore, with Knights of Fulfillment's Library, I do think that this is a pretty good card. It's good for its value. It only costs 1. Essentially, you can re-roll. You get another chance to re-roll, right? So essentially, you roll your 8 dice. You don't like it, you roll again. You don't like it, with Knights of Fulfillment's Library, you can roll a 3rd time. So it is really, really good if you're trying to activate the Cryo damage on Maguu Genki. The other dice package that we have, to no people's surprise, is Paimon. Paimon is another way for you to get additional dice so that you'll be able to activate Diluc's third elemental skill, but do not get baited by that elemental skill. Only use it if you are sure that it will bring you to victory. If not, focus on setting up Maguu Genki, focus on setting up Jean, because big damage and big healing from these two characters can be more valuable than the total of 11 damage from Diluc alone. The other dice fixes we have would be Liban. What you would be able to see in this particular deck is that sometimes, or most of the times, we end up spending our dice quite inefficiently, because Maguu Genki and Jean like to have aligned elemental dice, which means that they only either use a Nemo or Cryo dice. They don't really like to deal normal damage. Because of that, they can't be super efficient with the dice usage, and therefore you need Liban to pick up the pieces and hopefully create additional Omni dice for you as quickly as possible. Of course, we play the Elemental Resonance Woven Winds to create one additional Anemo dice. There's no reason not to play this, especially if you have two characters of the same element. The next one is the Bestest Travel Companion, because this helps you to convert your elemental dice to Omni dice, which is great for all of your characters. Because if I'm not wrong, Diluc, spends 4 dice, 4 Pyro dice in order to use his elemental burst, and Jean uses 4 dice as well. So this is a very dice hungry deck and team in general. So that's basically the dice fixing package that we have. We do have the Lyria Harbor Wharf as well, which allows us to draw 2 additional cards during the end phase. You could argue that this is a dice fixer as well, especially for Diluc and Jean, because essentially through the use of this you can draw into the bestest companion ever a bit more consistently. Additionally, you can also have more cards in your hand that allows you to swap into your active character's elemental dice. So yeah, this can be considered a dice fixer as well. I don't know, I have just been experimenting with this. I do think that it works with this particular deck, but I don't blame anyone for wanting to swap into something else. For example, Liu Su, in order to create more opportunity for energy generation, right? So I do think that this card can be interchangeable with Liu Su, but let me know what you think. Apart from the dice fixing package, we also have the quick swap package. So you have your usual leave it to me. The next time you perform a switch character, it is considered a fast action. You also have when the crane returns. Next time you use a skill, essentially you can swap to your next character. I really like this when I am using Maguu Genki in the late game, because essentially with the use of Maguu Genki, I can potentially apply Cryo damage, use when the crane returns, swap with Diluc, and hopefully do big Cryo-Melt damage for a total of, I think that would be 6 damage in total between Maguu Genki and Diluc. So yeah, the crane return is pretty good in this particular deck. But the MVP for this deck is actually Elemental Resonance Impetuous Winds. Essentially, this is a specialization for Anemo characters. You have to use 1 Anemo dice to use it, but essentially it means that your swap is a fast action swap. You can swap to any target character you want, and you also create 1 Omni element. So the moment you roll 1 Anemo dice, you are set, because essentially this allows you to create an Omni die, which can help certain dice breaking. For example, if you don't have enough Cryo dice for Maguu Genki, this can be quite controversial, but essentially if you really are desperate for a Cryo dice, you can swap from Maguu Genki to Jean through the use of this particular card. You get the Omni element, and then you swap back through the use of this card again if you have the second copy, and then you get 2 Omni dice just like that. And hopefully that will allow you to enable the Cryo damage from Maguu Genki. So that is basically our quick swap package in here. And finally, we also play the energy package. We have star signs allowing your characters to gain 1 energy. This is pretty efficient for Maguu Genki because it's essentially one of your first turn plays is that you can go for Frosty Assault, go for Blustering Blade. That would leave Maguu Genki with 2 energy online and with 2 dice left. With the remaining 2 dice, you can essentially use star signs to set up Maguu Genki's burst. as a first attack in round 2. So this is a pretty efficient card. You can also use Classic Art. I really like this in this particular deck because all 3 characters need 3 energy in order to use their burst. So this can be super helpful and super clutch if you have 1 energy across all of your different characters, and you'll be able to activate one of your character's burst just like that. In terms of the other cards that I play, I do play one of Send-Off. I might play more of this, I don't know, I just can't find the space for this. But Send-Off is just an overall really good card right now, especially with people playing Oceanite, people playing Maguu Genki, people playing Fisho or Akole. In these particular instances, that's when you need to use Send-Off. Oh, it's really good for Ganyu as well. In these particular instances, you really want to use Send-Off in order to bait your opponent into spending their energy to play their nice little summons, and then you send off to remove them. We also play a few food package here just for recovery's sake. We have 1 stat hash brown, 1 of them to recover 2 HP. And other than that, we also play 2 of mushroom pizza. The reason why we play 2 mushroom pizza over hash brown is because most of the time you'll find that a lot of your characters actually stay in the back. For example, I might use Maguu Genki in turn 1. I deal lots of damage with him through the use of setting up the 2 shadow guys and then using his burst. But then in return, Maguu Genki should be down to 4 or 5 HP. In that case, I would probably want to swap over to Diluc to start dealing damage. I might want to swap over to Jean instead to continue to control my opponent's characters. When that is the case, it means that I probably don't want to leave Maguu Genki out to dry, and therefore I would want to use Mushroom Pizza so that I can heal a total of about 3 damage for Maguu Genki for the next 3 rounds. So yeah, this is basically the deck. In summary, what we're trying to do is that we're trying to set up with Maguu Genki, apply Cyro across your opponent's board, use Diluc's big pyro damage in order to melt your opponents into oblivion. And then you also want to use Jean because she is a good healer in general, and her Gillblade is super strong against setup teams. And yeah, that is the summary of this entire deck. Now we will go into the gameplay, and if you have any recommendations on how we can switch up the deck, or if you have any of your own builds that look slightly similar but you have certain tech that is different, do let me know in the comments below. Thank you, and I will see you in the gameplay. Alright, so in this game 1, we are up against Yoimiya, Keqing, and Cyno. So the moment I saw this deck, I was actually thinking, wow, we really need to get rid of Yoimiya as soon as possible, because Yoimiya is essentially the only overload enabler. So with this particular setup, I think my opponent is going first, right? And I couldn't tell if my opponent was going to start with Yoimiya first or Keqing first. And therefore, I think my priority here is I was very happy to see the Leave It To Me and when the Crane returns. My priority here was to get as many swaps as possible so that I can go up with Maguu Genki, try to do the setup. If they do not start with Yoimiya, I will do the setup. If they do start with Yoimiya, I was going to swap into Jean and use Gillblade to blow Yoimiya away. But it seems like my opponent is using Keqing here instead, which is not terrible for me. And as you can see, I was trying very hard to get the 3 Cyro dice, which I do get. So one tip about getting 3 Cyro dice, right, is that even if you see 3 Anemo dice in your pool, just sacrifice some of them to reroll for that Cyro dice. Because the thing is, you can only get Cyro dice through the use of rerolling, and you will not be able to get Cyro dice if you want to use a card to swap it for a Cyro dice. You can only swap for Anemo dice, and therefore don't be afraid to swap it out. So here I can see that my opponent has actually used Yusu and sneakily swapped over to Yoimiya, but luckily that was something that I was prepared for. Instead of holding on to my Cyro play, I can see that Yoimiya is 50% away from her burst, and therefore I used a quick swap into Jean and used Gillblade to blow her away. And arguably I am probably just delaying the impact of Yoimiya because she sets up her burst very easily. But I think it is worth delaying because through using Jean, I am essentially using Gillblade not just to swap Yoimiya out, but I'm also using her to deal chip damage onto Yoimiya, which allows me to knock her out more easily later on. So my opponent just easily switches back to Yoimiya, and I do have a decision point here. Do I want to commit to the disruption play, or do I want to, you know, just let it go, let them have their thing, let them have their, let them set up the burst? But I do want to commit, and I did so by sacrificing all of my cards in order for them to swap back into Keqing. The thing here is that I've run out of cards. I don't have anything I can do with my dice, and therefore I cannot attack with Jean again. But what I can do here is that I use Gillblade to chip some damage into Yoimiya. Even if they were to swap back now and use some sort of attack to finish setting up her burst, I am fine with that because now she is only at 4 HP left. I can just end my turn now. Hope to swap her away later on through the use of Gillblade, bring her down to 1 HP, and then if they don't have any fast actions, it means that I should be able to take Yoimiya out. But they actually go into Cyno instead. I don't really understand this play. Maybe they're thinking, oh, if I go into Cyno and if my opponent uses Gillblade, I can go into Yoimiya for free. But yeah, that might be the thinking there. If I wasn't careful, I would have fell for that trap, but luckily I am careful in this instance, I believe. So I do start thinking a little bit hard here. I can either start to, you know, just go for the normal attack against Cyno, or I can go into Maguu Genki and start to set up, which is why I am taking a while to think. The benefit of attacking Cyno with Jean right now is that I can chip 2 damage and set up my burst. The downside of it is that I am committing 3 dice to use Jean, which means that I can only use her to Gillblade Yoimiya once. So if they do go into Yoimiya now, right, what I can do is that I can still swap back to Jean. They can do their attack to swap to set up the elemental burst, but I can also spend this dice to swap back into Jean and use 2 times Gillblade. So that was the thinking behind this. So it's basically trying to play a little game of hide and seek with Yoimiya, trying to beat them out, and they do it, and I think they go back into Jean in this instance. But unfortunately, even if I do swap back into Jean, one thing that I forgot is that I don't actually have enough dice to do Gillblade twice. I can probably only do it once, and then I would need to use all my cards to swap out into an Anemo card. But unfortunately, they do have star signs, which is slightly annoying, but hey, what can you do? I've tried my best. But it was still not enough to take out Yoimiya before she does her elemental burst. So the next best thing I can do is to, you know, just try to stall some time and chip damage away at my opponents, because I do need to survive for the next 2 rounds. This round is almost coming to an end. They do swap into Keqing so that they can deal both Cryo and Pyro damage onto me, which is going to hurt. But you know what? I just need to survive somehow. And unfortunately, I do have my burst set up, but I don't have enough dice to use it. So that is extremely sad. My opponent is taking a while to think here. For those people who say that aggro decks are just ooga booga big decks, that is not true. You do need to think about your sequences, you do need to think about your setup. My opponent has very respectably, decided not to attack with Keqing and decided to set up for the next turn instead, which I felt was interesting because essentially they could have dealt 5 damage to me against Jean, bringing her down to 2 HP, but they decided not to do any damage at all, so yeah, that actually caught me by surprise. So I'll just do a like for like Paimon play and end my turn. So what I was really hoping for here was actually a quick swap, so that I can switch over to another character to prevent Jean from taking another beating. But hey, what can you do, right? I guess I'm just all out in the Jean / Maguu Genki play, because right now my opponent is going to attack me first, which means that I will be swapped out into Maguu Genki. There's nothing I can do about it. And therefore, I thought, yep, I need the Cryo dice in order to start setting up for my Diluc. So here, most instances I would set up either the Anemo Shadow or the Cryo Shadow. Decided to go in for the Cryo Shadow instead because they are probably going to attack me again and use Overload on me. And what that means is that I will have to go into Diluc now. So hopefully with the Cryo setup, at least I'll be able to do some melt damage.
Incoming.
So here I did think that I was going to get into trouble. If I'm not wrong, my opponent has 4 dice left, I think. And they have Keqing's Burst set up. They have 5 cards in their hands. They could easily use their Burst to take out my Jean and deal lots of damage to Diluc. But somehow that's not what they decided to do. They decided to go into Cyno instead, which I thought was a little bit strange, but they probably have another plan in mind. They probably just wanted to, chip down my entire team's damage and take them all out in one go through the use of Keqing. That could be it. But yeah, I decided to sacrifice my Maguu Genki instead. I know that they will have another attack to go, but Diluc is currently at 9 HP. I don't want him to take any more damage because I need him to deal big late game damage through the use of Melt, right? So Maguu Genki is going to die, swapping into Diluc. And with that, it just means that, hey, I survived for this turn because that was all of the dice. Yoimiya's burst is going to run out at the end of this round, and I survived the Yoimiya enabled onslaught. So here I just do a classic Libyan play, end my turn, set up lots of dice for the next turn, and hopefully survive next turn because my Diluc is, does have Pyro applied to me. I might die. It is very, very dangerous at the moment, but we'll see. So I have a total of 12 dice now, which is great, but I do need to survive. I don't have a way to bring back my Diluc if my opponent uses Overload to attack me. So I'm just, in for the right now. I have to go all in, attack Cyno, and probably use Jean's Burst next turn if I'm not wrong, but we'll see. This is me trying to figure out, okay, if I don't use the burst, if I use Guild Blade, can Yoimiya kill me? And the answer is yes, she can. So I just decide to play it safe, eat the mushroom pizza, use the Guild Blade, so that Yoimiya cannot kill me. She'll only be able to do 2 damage at me. And that way I'll be able to continue to chip off damage from my opponent. So here I just go for the Guild Blade and hope that my opponent doesn't swap their Yoimiya out, because if they don't, essentially my Cryo Shadow and my Anemo Feud will be able to take them out. They do use that energy gaining card though, which is very unfortunate, but hey, Jin is now dead and they have that thing set up again. I am just going to end my turn because I do need to go first next and hopefully kill off their team. Yep, so luckily through the use of my endgame damage, I'm able to, or rather my end phase damage, I'm able to knock out Yoimiya and Cyno at the same time, which leaves Keqing at a position whereby she has Cryo applied to her. All I need to do is, you know, either use Wolf's Greystone and deal normal attack against her, or I can just do power damage against her right now. I do decide to go for the power damage though, you know, just not to BM my opponent because I want to play against my opponents respectfully and not maximize the damage against them when I am going to win. So yeah, that was game 1, and GG's to my opponent. That was pretty fun, that was interesting. I don't know why they didn't choose to use that Keqing burst when they could, but yeah, let's go on to the next game. So up next we have a game against Barbara, Cyno, and Xingqiu. This is actually my second game against this opponent. I actually lost my first one. It was a very, very bad loss. My opponent played it super well, did lots of recovery, and somehow I managed to match against them again. And because of that, I kind of know what kind of tricks my opponent's going for. I do realize that this is a heavy recovery deck. I need to beat down one character, any character, just one character as soon as possible, because the less characters they have, the less tricks they have up their sleeves. So I am quite happy that I was going first, which is exactly why I chose to go in with the Maguu Genki, because I thought, hey, if I am going first, I would need to set up all of my swirls as quickly as possible. So even though I whiff on the Cryo die, at least I have 2 times Bestest Companion in me, in my hand, and therefore I'm still able to apply Cryo damage against my opponent. If my opponent had sent Xingqiu out first, I may go for the normal attack, wait for them to do their Hydro application before I go on to use my Cryo damage so that I can freeze the Xingqiu. But what you can see here is that they actually decided to play Catherine first and then do a quick swap over to Xingqiu. I am not too bothered by this. This is actually fine. What I would do instead is I would use my Anemo application, right? Try to do the swirl. I do additional damage to Barbara because she is now frozen, but I am not super bothered by the fact that they had Hydro applied to them. What I can do next, or rather during this end phase, is that I can essentially use Star Signs to set up my Elemental Burst, and then use the 2 shadows to deal additional damage across the board, and hopefully bring my opponent down to very little health and take out at least one of their characters. So right now, as you can see, Barbara is down to 6 health, Cyno down to 7 health, Xingqiu down to 7 health. And that is essentially the kill zone for Maguu Genki. So I was actually a lot happier with how I played this as compared to how I played it in the first round. I was soundly defeated by my opponent in the first round. It was very bad. So my opponent does go first. They can go for the Rain Cutter, which I expect them to do. Sorry, not Rain Cutter. The burst essentially is the Rain Cutter. But yeah, I expect them to go for the Elemental Burst.
Rain Cutter.
Yeah, it is Rain Cutter. Okay. But anyway, they also go for the Hydro Recovery, which is pretty annoying because essentially they heal the entire team, bringing everything out of their kill zone. But I wanted to be conservative with my burst because essentially in the first game, I used my burst in a position that prevented me from killing off my opponent, and it felt like quite a waste. So essentially what I decided to go for here instead is to be conservative with my burst, try to shut down my opponents a little bit more, and freeze them instead. Here I'm hoping that they go into their Barbara, because Barbara is still at 7 HP, and therefore if I use my burst here, it is still not too late for me to take a knockout. So my opponent is taking a while to think, but they are a very good player, and they're probably trying to assess, what they can do to get out of the current situation. They do recognize that switching over to Barbara might be the best play because they do need to set up their recovery through the use of Barbara's elemental skill. But they also recognize that if they swap into Barbara without any sort of protection, essentially Maguu Genki will be able to get the win. And now that I see the Lotus in play, I am no longer enticed to use my burst because, as mentioned earlier, I want to knock any of their character out as soon as possible. Doesn't matter who, as long as I knock one of them out, they become a little bit more crippled because they will not be able to do their quick swaps with Catherine and do any sort of do too many variations of combat tricks. So here it is clear that I would not be able to kill off Barbara, so what I opt to do instead is to be a bit more disciplined and apply the shadow guy. The shadow anemo guy, so that I can at least do 1 damage to the rest of the team. And through the use of this end phase, essentially bring Barbara down to 5 HP and the rest at 6 and 5 HP. So it seems like I'm in a very good position right now, but the keyword is seems. This is a very recovery heavy deck, and therefore I was still not thinking that I was in a great position yet. I do think that there is still ways to go. So here I am probably thinking that, hey, I can probably knock most of my opponent's characters out with the use of the burst. But if I am not mistaken, I think this is the turn whereby they play a second Lotus. Yep, so they do play the second Lotus on Barbara, and they probably want her to play her elemental skill. Yep, let the show begin so that they can start healing the rest of their team. But I am still trying to be fairly disciplined here. I do not want to use my burst. So what I'll do instead is that I would like to... I could either apply Cyro here, or I could choose to go for a normal attack. But what I chose to do here is to go for the Cyro instead, so that I can refresh the usage of my shadow. Some people might say, hey, you've just, attacked 3 times with your burst online, you could have set out another burst by now, which is true. But the thing is, if I had used my burst earlier, I know that my opponent specializes in defensive and counter-attack plays. If I don't have a threat like the burst online on my Maguu Genki to threaten my opponent, they would probably do other plays and not play the Lotus instead. Instead of playing the Lotus, they would have had a lot of recoveries in, and they would have dealt a lot of damage to my characters. So what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes it is fine to leave your burst online and not use it, just to kind of use it as a deterrent to scare off your opponents and say, hey, if you don't defend or if you don't switch now, I'm going to kill this character. Do you want that to happen? And let them decide, yeah? So they do go into Xingqiu. I think they're trying to use, they're just trying to chip off the Maguu Genki so that he dies as quickly as possible. But I do think that, you know, I want the knockout. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter who, I just want one knockout because it is going to cripple this team. And this is an interesting decision point now, is basically which cards do I want to burn in order to use my Maguu Genki's burst. And the clear candidates will be either Leave It to Me or When the Crate Returns, because I do have better cards to play. I'm also thinking if I want to, you know, start to heal my characters as well, but I didn't do so in the end. And I actually burnt 2 cards in order to play the burst, because I miscalculated. I thought I was using Diluc or Jean that need 4 of the same elemental dice. Maguu Genki only needs 3, so I actually wasted 1 card. So my opponent does end their round here. I recognize that if they leave Barbara out, they can easily use their normal attack to do 2 + 2 damage, or rather 1 + 1 damage? I can't remember. But basically they can easily take out Maguu Genki. I do use the hash round on Maguu Genki anyway, knowing that he will be knocked out. Reason for that is because I don't want them to be applying any Hydro application on my Diluc. So if I leave Maguu Genki out, it essentially means that Maguu Genki will take Barbara's damage, take the Raincutter damage, and then I will swap into Diluc for the cleanup. So Barbara does go to 4 damage here, which is slightly annoying. That's not what I like to see, because essentially it means that I cannot, you know, kill off quickly. I don't have any characters that can do 4 damage to her. But what I decided to do is, you know, just play it safe. If they want to use the elemental burst, they can, but I'm just going to play it safe. I want to sustain damage. I want to you know, keep the pressure on. And they do leave they do use the elemental burst, and you can see how strong it is. Because essentially the entire team just heals by 4 HP, right? Which is this, and this is the exact reason why I want to, you know, take out any one of their characters, because the moment I do that, it diminishes the returns of this elemental burst that Barbara has. If she was able to use the burst and, you know, bring Xingqiu back up to 8 health, that would be a disaster for me.
Let's finish this swiftly.
And now fully recognizing that they no longer have any more dice, the only thing they can do here is either end their turn or swap to another character. And I don't really mind what they do here. I just want to bring Diluc in to start to add some pyro damage, and add some additional pressure. Even if they were to leave Barbara in, I'll be fine with that, because essentially Diluc will be able to do 3 damage, and then the Cryo Shadow guy will be able to do additional damage due to Melt. But instead of the pyro damage, I decided to go for the normal attack here. I think the thinking here is that if I go for the pyro, I will indeed do melt damage, right? But I will not be able to swirl into Cyno to do additional damage against him. This is important because I want to keep Cyno, I want to keep Barbara's health both down. Even if I were to use the pyro and the melt damage, I would not be able to knock out Barbara anyway. So it felt like, I think Barbara would have gone down to just 1 HP. And since I couldn't kill her off, I'd rather do 1 damage against Cyno. So this is an interesting play. I didn't expect them to swap into Cyno here. I thought they would continue to use Barbara to chip me down and use Cyno for the late game win. But essentially this is what they do. I was actually a little bit surprised by that, because I was going to go for the Diluc endgame, whereby I just, spam Diluc's attack in order to kill off their characters. But now fully recognizing that Cyno is in a great position while Diluc is not in a great position, I need to control my opponent's play. I need to swap back into Barbara again. Or rather, I need my opponent to swap back into Barbara, so I am swapping into Jean through the use of that very good Anemo card, generating me 1 Omni Dice. And I'm going to need to burn lots of my cards to play Anemo attacks instead, because I did not think that this was going to happen. Luckily for me, my opponent has also run out of rain cutters, and therefore they were not able to deal additional damage with Cyno. I mean, Cyno is quite powerful right now because they are at stage 4, which means they have 2 additional damage to whatever attack they choose to run. But I think I still felt relatively secure in this position. They can either, swap back to Cyno again. That would no longer be a quick swap. If that's the case, I can just use Gillblade and bring Barbara back. But essentially what they do is that they do play Let the Show Begin, and that tells me that, yep, I need to go all in. I need to use Gillblade, kill off Barbara, and apply Cryo to Cyno.
I feel a little weak.
Surrender!
So my opponent decides to go for the aggro play, which is fine by me. I think I am probably just going to swap over to
Let's finish
Diluc
this swiftly.
apply more damage on them. And hopefully try to kill them off in the next turn. So I don't really know why I used that Leave It To Me. I really didn't need to, but yeah, I used it. Probably a brain fart. But yeah, essentially right now, Cyno is still back to 1 HP. They would need some form of recovery in order to not die in this turn. But I do feel relatively secure at this point because they've used both of their lotuses for now. They've used some of their recovery food, for example, the mushroom pizza. Even if they did use the Mondstadt hash brown, it will only bring them up to 3 HP, and that is still within the kill zone for both Diluc and Jean.
There can be no excuse for defeat.
Let the wind lead.
Yep. So they do go for the mushroom pizza play, but luckily I am able to deal enough damage to kill off Cyno. So yeah, GG's to my opponent. This was a very fun game, especially since I got soundly beaten in the previous game, and learned a lot from this person on how to play against, you know, defensive counter-attack cards or decks that like to, you know, have a second wind by recovering your characters over and over again. So yeah, that was all the gameplay I wanted to show today. If you enjoyed the video, do like and subscribe, and I will see you later. Alright, bye.